Greetings, friends. This is a panel discussion from Disciples Peace Fellowship about facilitating small group conversations about justice. I'm the Reverend Brian Frederick-Gray. I'm the Director of Mission Support and the Peace Intern program at DPF. And let's have our panelists introduce themselves so we can just jump straight in.
I'm Tiffany Curtis. I'm the minister of First Christian Church of Santa Fe, and I'm on the Disciples Peace Fellowship board and a former Disciples Peace intern. And I'm super passionate about group facilitation. So I'm excited to be here and reflect on some of these topics with you all.
My name is Krista Weicksel. I work with Global Ministries as the Associate for Global Advocacy and Education, but my background and passion is in peace building and conflict resolution and dialogue processes. So like Tiffany, I'm a former peace intern and look forward to discussing some strategies with you all today.
Hi, my name is Jennifer Williams. I'm based out of New Orleans, Louisiana currently, and I am a current 2020 Disciples Peace Fellow. And I am just really excited to learn this process with you all while also teaching. So,
as we think about facilitating conversations, especially justice conversations in small groups, what are some of the first things that comes to mind?
First and foremost is the foundation of respect. We're all humans. We're all coming together for a conversation to better all of us.
Similarly, one of the things that you modeled in your introduction, Jennifer, is humility as a facilitator, and just recognizing that as a facilitator, you're always learning, and we're learning together as a group.
Preparation as well. I think if we can go into a conversation with a proposed structure, even for a fairly informal conversation, thinking carefully about a leading question to start with, even asking someone to maybe, if Tiffany and I are helping to facilitate a dialogue, if I introduce and then ask her to go first and model kind of a depth and length of speaking, that we tend to see that people will follow.
It's one of the places that I think we get ourselves into trouble quickly when it comes to these kinds of conversations, is if we just go into it and think, well, I can just wing this.
Giving yourself that time to really just sit and reflect and pray and meditate and be with, what is my goal for this conversation? How am I going to structure it? Preparing yourself both spiritually and logistically.
Doing that kind of preparation and being really grounded, I think, allows us to improvise in the moment if we need to, in the midst of a dialogue.
When you've really prepared, then you can really listen and really be present to where things need to shift, and how you can be flexible with the structure in order to really meet your goals and keep the conversation going.
In addition to the preparation that we do for ourselves, actually giving the group an opportunity to prepare as well can be really helpful. We're going to be talking about this particular justice issue that might raise some differences and some tensions in our group, and that's okay. So for many of our small groups, they spend some of their sessions working on what their covenant is going to be. The promises that they'll be keeping together over the course of their small group time. It often sets up the ways that conversations like these can happen.
That is essential, having group norms or statements or covenant, because it creates the group culture, it creates the expectations, and so don't skip it.
Process-wise, to maybe name a couple, to say, I'd like to start with these as a couple guidelines for you to consider. What else would you add as a group together before we begin the conversation?
What are some of the things that you all have seen included in those kinds of covenants, and what kind of advice would you have for people as they're putting them together for their small groups?
Using I statements, listening deeply, listening to understand, not to respond.
Be grounded within yourself, but still remaining flexible. That's something that always comes up in covenant. So author your story, especially in these conversations, authoring your stories alongside God and God's word. I think it's going to be even more important. So you'll see in a few covenants, this normalization of when presenting with new information, new perspectives, to say it's okay to change, because that's what we came here to do, is to grow and change and learn together.
I've often found something related to confidentiality to be helpful, to say what is said in this circle stays in this circle, or I've heard feel free to share the miracle, but not the details of a story.
Knowing that it's always okay to pass.
In the visions guidelines, they say it's okay to disagree. It's not okay to shame, blame, or attack self or others. There's many ways to say that, but that's one of the ways that they break that down.
As a facilitator, don't be afraid to change it, right? If you're halfway through the conversation, or if this is a multi-event conversation, and you're on day 2 or day 3 of it, and you're like, hey, check in with your constituents. Is this covenant still what we like, or do we want to add something? Do we want to reword something differently?
It's really important to revisit those, so that it's not just a static document that everyone forgot about if we were in person, on the flip chart paper on the wall. When reconvening or at various points as appropriate, like going around the room and having each person say one aloud, read it off of the list.
Exactly. And maybe even having some kind of ritual, or maybe it's a lighting of a candle or a moment of silence, or some way to say we're entering back into this space, this time of these covenants.
As we think about leading a justice conversation itself, Krista, this might be a helpful time to come in with a description about the circle process.
I love the circle process. It's a dialogue process I found to be very, very powerful and meaningful. So similarly, as we've been talking about, different guidelines that we would set for a conversation, the two that might be different is always, using a talking piece and committing to only speaking while holding, a particular talking piece. And often the facilitator will bring an object that's meaningful to them, hopefully not just a marker, and to explain a story of why it's meaningful. And then we commit to only speaking while holding that. And then usually you are sitting in a circle. And then you take that talking piece and pass it on to the next person who would only speak while holding it, or who might say, I'll pass, and they just pass it on to the next person. So those are a couple more values, using a talking piece, committing to listening deeply, only speaking while you hold the talking piece, and that you can always feel free to pass. And the facilitator, the circle keeper, will help to propose a question, go around the circle, and then add another question that will then go around the circle. Just one last piece, it is a tool often used in restorative justice, but one that very much comes from Indigenous traditions. And so an important part of introducing the circle process is to name the land that you are on, and those who have been stewards of the land.
As we continue thinking about leading those conversations and folks who will be leading these kinds of conversations, are there other best practices that we'd like to lift up?
Part of preparation is determining what structure you're going to use, and it's just so important that you have a structure, whatever it is. And it could be circle process, which is a very simple yet very powerful structure. It could be something more complex than that involves a lot of different configurations, like breaking into dyads and then doing things in the larger group, and whatever, journaling, like having all kinds of elements. I think it really depends on your style as a facilitator, kind of what types of activities you feel comfortable facilitating, but then also what your goals are for the conversation. And I think that's really gonna determine which structural elements you want to incorporate.
Another tool I've sometimes used is taking the temperature of the room or of a group. So whether it's a color, red, yellow, and green, or a number, just saying, hey, on a scale of 1 to 3, 3, you're feeling like you have a lot of energy, you're really present in this space. 1 being, I'm struggling right now. Everybody put up a finger and show us where you're at.
As a facilitator, it would be in your best interest, even from the beginning, I would say probably before, after covenant, putting some very lighthearted questions so that you start building the relationship between participants. Because then as you get into the deeper conversations and the harder, more difficult ones, you're going to notice that your participants are better suited to be more respectful and to take more from other people when they know, oh, I have a dog as well, or I am from the same hometown as this person. So there's that relationship that has already been built there, instead of just off the get-go, oh, you have a difference of opinion than me, I want to separate from that.
I also think what opening question you lead with can really help to shape what kind of conversation you have. So you can say like, all right, discuss Trump's border policies. What do you think? And you're going to get a certain kind of option. But if you say like, if we imagined like what values would be held on our border, what would that look like? You're already going to set up a different kind of conversation.
There is an excellent book that I highly recommend, Unlocking the Magic of Facilitation. It's really great. It's really short, very funny, super, super good read. But they do a lot of great content on tension in conversations. And one of the huge things that they really center in this book that I love is the idea of not saying no and but, saying yes and, right? Which is an improv comedy concept, finding a way to kind of build upon a statement that feels off, to really bring that person into the fold, to not shut them down, not trigger them potentially, and invite them to really stay in the conversation by affirming them as a person while still steering their comment more in the direction that you feel is helpful to the group.
And I think I've seen too in those situations, those pivot points or those tension points, you know, the active listening and the reflecting back, you know, saying, so what I hear you saying is that this was a really painful experience for you. And people often either kind of nod and kind of be engaged in someone heard me, or they'll say, well, that's not exactly it. And they'll clarify. But I find that to be a helpful kind of reflection back. And in group facilitation, and definitely with my toddler too.
Any wrap-up pieces that we want to make sure and share, things we haven't had the chance to say yet?
I'm reminded of the 4 stages of intergroup dialogue presented by Michigan State. Stage 1 being group beginnings, forming and building relationships. Stage 2 being exploring the nature of social identity. Stage 3, exploring and discussing hot topics. And I think sometimes, especially when we get to the time element, right, we're running over time. Stage 4 gets lost. And so I would say make sure, even if it's 4 or 5 minutes at the end, that you build in time as a facilitator for stage 4, which is action planning and alliance building. Give people the chance to have some action steps and take that discussion and move it further.
One of the things that camp settings in particular often give us is lots of space and room to process. And so to know that even though maybe this small group session has wrapped up, that folks are going to be bringing this conversation with them. And so to be able to open up space as well in subsequent small group sessions and meetings. Hey, does anybody have anything that they've continued working on? Thinking about the conversation that we were having, because folks are going to keep wrestling with it, and the Spirit is going to keep wrestling with us along with them.
Thinking about accountability and how that can be built into these groups, especially if they're groups that are meeting regularly. I know I'm a part of an anti-racism moms group that's committed to meet monthly, and we decided that our opening question wouldn't just be about checking in, but what's one specific thing you've done in this past month, you know, to work towards racial justice in your community. I think when we have these kind of sacred spaces, we can commit to what values do we want to uphold, and how are we helping to hold each other accountable.
That we're talking here about a faith-based context, which I think gives us some unique tools and opportunities in terms of grounding our conversation in scripture, grounding the conversation in prayer, giving silent time for prayer and meditation, praying for each other, praying with each other, these practices of our faith that really bring us together. And I think that can really provide somewhat of a feeling of safety or container for having these more challenging conversations that can sometimes feel harder to create in maybe more of a secular setting. And so I think we actually have a great advantage in having these conversations in a faith-based context, and to really make sure that we're drawing upon those tools and resources of our faith tradition.
Friends, we're going to have to leave it there. A thank you to our panelists for this wonderful conversation. A thank you for watching all the way to the end, and blessings to you on the conversations that you'll be leading and facilitating. If you're looking for more resources, check out our website, disciplespeace.org, where you can find more information as well as a full cut of this video.